Today I have an announcement for everybody that is listening to this podcast and especially is interested in improving his or her skills in terms of leadership, in terms of influencing. I'm talking quite a lot in this podcast about it, and I'm really passionate about it because I've experienced firsthand in my own career and in lots of other careers how investing in this skill and then applying these skills has helped me to have a much more successful and much more motivating and much more satisfying career. So if you want to improve your leadership skills as well, then I have an offer for you. We are now enrolling again into the Effective Statistician Leadership Program. We designed this program, so we, as Gary and I, designed this program for statisticians to strengthen your leadership skills. This will help you to maximize your impact at work. And it also helps you if you have no direct reports. It's really about cross-functional leadership skills. The Effective Statistician Leadership Program is a modular program. It contains self-learning parts and, if you want, also moderated small group discussions. We have specifically designed this for statisticians. And there's a lot of examples from the pharmaceutical industry, of course, but the concepts will also apply outside of the pharmaceutical industry. It really aims at all levels of statisticians, and we had all different levels of statisticians. We had people that were very, very early in their careers. And we recommend that if you have started your first job in the industry, let's say at least 1.5 years ago, then this is really good for you. We had pretty senior people in this program as well, and we got a lot of really, really positive feedback from them. So one of them, for example, is Richard Zink. Yeah, you can check on the homepage, theeffectivestatistician.com, what he, without us asking for it, wrote on LinkedIn about it. And that is really, really good. There's also a lot of other quotes from people that speak about the experience that they have in the Effective Statistician Leadership Program. So there's, for example, one participant who said, the program really helped me to demystify and break down what leadership is. Or another one that says, the number one thing that was most helpful is that the structure of the program has helped me to go through the aspects of leadership and evaluate them one step at a time. That speaks to the framework that we are talking here about leadership. Our framework gives you really all the different aspects about leadership because there's actually quite a lot of them. And of course, there's a lot of leadership trainings that go into specific parts of that. For example, presentation or negotiation. And we put all these different parts of leadership into this framework. And that helps you to identify what is the basis, for example, for leadership, which is communication. And what you then need to learn about all the others. And when something goes wrong, you can then identify much better what went wrong and then adjust accordingly. We also give you a good model for how you can improve your leadership skills, because it's not sufficient to just, let's say, read a book or listen to this podcast. That helps, of course, but it's not sufficient. There's a couple of other things that you need to do, and actually you can do on a continuous basis, on a daily basis, to learn about your leadership skills. And in this program, we will teach you how to do this. Now, this program has basically 3 different parts in it. The first is we have videos for self-learning, so at your own time. So it's really great for people all around the world. Initially, we had it in the live format, and of course that meant that you needed to organize your calendar to be available at a specific time. Now it's self-paced learning, and we have about 13 hours of content. Now 13 hours of content sounds really, really a lot, but the program is there to be actually consumed about something like 5 months. So if you think about 5 months, then it's about, maybe an hour per week or less that you need to invest in it. Okay, the second part that we have in the program are assignments. These assignments will help you to apply what you have learned through an exercise or in your day-to-day job. And these applications and then reflecting about it will help you to much better understand the concepts, to see how it really applies in your day-to-day situations. The third part of the program consists of what we call Masterminds. And the Masterminds are really, really cool part of it. In these Masterminds, we create small groups of about 10 people each, and Gary will walk with these groups through the program and will review what you have learned, discuss about your experiences, and then you can learn from your peers as well as talking about your own experiences and reflecting on them, what leadership is and how to become better at it. And you will learn all the different steps to become a better leader. So this is, of course, something that is a premium access. Yeah, so the masterminds take a lot of time, and therefore we only have 30 slots available for these. Taking just the online recording and the assignments doing it yourself is, of course, there's much more slots available for that. That's no problem. But for the masterminds, there's only 30 slots available. And I guess when you listen to this, we have already started with a promotion, and these slots will actually fill up quite fast. So head over to theeffectivestatistician.com and check out the Effective Statistician Leadership Program. It's directly in the menu at the start. You can't really miss it, and sign up for it. Now you'll probably need to convince your supervisor about why your supervisor, your company, should support you attending this program. And we have been thinking about this. I had these discussions quite a lot, and Gary as well. And Gary has been, a supervisor for a very, very long time, who were approached by people about, I want to do this program, or I want to do this course, and I want to spend money here in terms of my development. And he knows what makes a supervisor approve these things. And so he has put down a couple of good arguments that you can use with your supervisor and why he should approve this spending. Of course, we also had students that paid it out of their own pockets because they saw it as something that is really, really helpful for their career, irrespective of whether the company pays for it. But if your company pays for it, that's even better. Now, what is the price of this? You can actually purchase it just, without the masterminds. Then it's 449 euros, which is about more or less the same in dollars, a little bit more in dollars. Or you can have all the 3 modules that we are offering together with the masterminds. Then it's 699 euros. I think that is really the best value for money, and I would highly recommend to go with the Masterminds. If you want to just try it out and just buy the first module, then you can have the first module for 179 euros and later purchase also the other two modules, so modules 2 and 3 for 349. But I'd really recommend you going to the one with the Masterminds. I think that is really the best value for money. If you are a supervisor and you're listening to this and you want to enroll more than 10 participants, and we had a couple of companies that enrolled lots more, then just contact me. You can find the email on the homepage, and then we can set up something specific for you. If you have any questions, reach out to me and write at alexander@theeffectivestatistician.com. I'm happy to help you to answer any questions, or contact me via LinkedIn. And if you have any questions about it. We have now more than 100 students that went through this program, and we received a lot of really, really good feedback. Just recently, I had a supervisor that enrolled quite a lot of students into this program, and we had a very good discussion with him, and he was very, very enthusiastic about the feedback from the participants. Or I spent some time with a company, actually a CRO, that enrolled a large proportion of their statisticians and their senior programmers in this program. And they absolutely loved it. And they actually did it without the Masterminds, but they organized it, the Masterminds basically themselves within the company. That's of course also possible. So if you have a good moderator or someone that is already very, very good in leadership skills, that's maybe an option, that you do it completely for yourself, and go through it as a group. Then touch base with me and we can enroll a bigger group at once. That also makes it easier. And there is also a special bonus if you enroll more than 10 participants. Okay, so that's it. Head over to theeffectivestatistician.com to learn more about this program. There's also frequently asked questions and all kind of other things that I don't want to mention here on the podcast. More quotes and all the details about the program, but I'm sure it will help you. Invest in yourself. I wouldn't talk about it if I wouldn't be really convinced about this program. Gary spent years, actually a decade, working on these. And he is really proud about this program because it encompasses all the learnings that he had over this decade of teaching about leadership to statisticians. And you can benefit from it. So head over and register now. Or talk to your supervisor to get approval. Bye for now. You are listening to the Effective Statistician podcast, the weekly podcast with Alexander Schacht and Benjamin Pieske, designed to help you reach your potential, lead great science, and serve patients without becoming overwhelmed by work. Today I'm talking with Aiden Flynn about clinical study simulations and how we can use them to design the best studies in the most effective way. And here are things now possible that really blow your mind. So stay tuned for this really, really nice discussion. If you think about simulations, maybe you have done a little bit of that at university or in other areas of your clinical or professional life. But today we are talking a lot about all these different things that we can do to get a better understanding of the performance of different clinical trial designs, and how we can explore all these different options using simulations. And so Aiden has worked on this in this field for a very, very long time and has a really, really nice tool there that people can use to better simulate their studies, better understand what are the different options you can have, and also how to do that in a very, very interactive way so that you can have a direct conversation with your other study team members or with your project team members. So stay tuned for that. I actually found Aiden on LinkedIn. Maybe you just head over to LinkedIn and connect with me as well. I'd love to see more faces of the effective statistician community. And maybe then you also get more content from you. Well, you surely get more content from me, because here I'm just posting on a weekly basis. On LinkedIn, it's nearly every day, and there's lots of further content you can get there. I'm producing this podcast in association with PSI, a community dedicated to leading and promoting the use of statistics within the healthcare industry for the benefit of patients. Join PSI today to further develop your statistical capabilities with access to the video-on-demand content library, free registration to all PSI webinars, and much, much more. The reduced rates is only £20 for non-high income countries and £95 for high income countries. Visit the PSI website at psiweb.org to learn more about PSI activities and become a PSI member today. Welcome to another episode, and today we are talking about simulations. Something looks like, making up numbers, but actually in this field, we can learn a lot from these, so to say, made up numbers, because we can understand quite complex patterns overall. And for that, I'm very happy to have Aiden on board. Aiden, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Alex. Thank you.
Very good. So, you're CEO of Exploristics. Can you tell us a little bit about this company and how you got about to create it and move forward with it and run it, and what was your purpose there?
Yep, sure. So I've been working in statistics for close to 30 years now, Alex. I started in academia. I moved to Glaxo. I was at Glaxo for 10 years, and then I set up Exploristics 11 years ago. And I guess there were two reasons for setting up Exploristics. One was really the volume of data that companies like Glaxo were generating as part of their development programs, or they had access to externally through real-world data sources. And the truth was, we really weren't making best use of all of those data sources. And part of the reason was there just wasn't the capability around, there wasn't the resource available to do that. So I felt there was an opportunity to start building some of those capabilities and then work with other companies to really help them exploit the data they have access to. That was one reason. The other was, having access to lots of data is good, but the truth is a lot of it is just noise. A lot of it is uninformative. A lot of it was never collected in such a way that we asked the question, well, what are we ever going to use this data for once we collect it? So it was never part of a design process. So I felt there was a need for developing a new tool whereby we can ask, what questions do we want to answer from our studies? And are we collecting the right data? Are we collecting enough of the data in order to give us a good chance of addressing those questions? And there was one particular motivation, which was around precision medicine. When I worked at GSK, we were collecting blood samples in all clinical trials with a view to using them for pharmacogenetics. But the truth is, the approach at the time was very reactive and retrospective. So if the study failed in an all-comer population, we might do some genotyping to identify a subgroup. And statisticians understand very well the chances of identifying a subgroup in a study that was never designed for that purpose is pretty small, and sometimes not far off zero. So we were spending a lot of money in the collection and storage of samples and genotyping, but the chance of success was so small. And I felt, if we're serious about things like precision medicine, we should really be building it into the designs of our studies, or at least having a strategy, a company-wide strategy that gives us a best chance of success.
If you talk about precision medicine, what does that mean for you?
A good question. It really is about understanding variability in treatment response. Mm-hmm. And you can use lots of different types of data to understand that variability, sort of patient level factors to understand that variability, but then to use that information to design more effective studies or to target the treatment to people who are more likely to derive additional benefits of treatment.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So we are today here to talk about trial simulations or simulations and maybe a little bit in general. So why do you think we need to simulate in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's almost a macro level argument here, which is we're working in an industry where there's an extremely high risk of failure. Mm-hmm. And that risk of failure hasn't really changed for a very long time. More than 90% of drugs that enter clinical trials fail to reach the market. And I would argue that a lot of the failures are avoidable. And they are avoidable if you do a bit more upfront planning. And there are simple things like the inability to recruit patients. That's something that clearly should be known at the start of the study. But I think there are some practices that sort of don't really help. One, when we're designing clinical trials, I think we make some very simplistic assumptions, even in the case where the design itself is quite simple, a fixed type of design, whereby we justify, a sample size based on some fixed set of assumptions that we may have obtained from the literature. As well as I do, if you get the right paper and you take a set of assumptions from that, you can justify virtually any sample size calculation. But what that isn't doing is capturing the true variability of the data that you're going to collect as part of the study. So I think we have this practice when designing clinical trials to take a complex situation and to reduce it to a very simple one, whereby we use a fixed set of assumptions, which we know to be incorrect or at least not real. So that's the kind of broader macro level. There's I think as well, as we think about the data that we're collecting in clinical trials and the complexity of it, I think, there are now some new types of approaches that we use, both the design and the analysis of the data and the decision rules that we apply that make it difficult to use the fairly, standard sample size calculation tools. So we need something more than exists right now, and this is where things like simulation can really help to try to better capture the complexity of the situation that you're working in.
Yeah, because if you have lots of kind of, if you just have one parameter you look into, and you just say, okay, I understand for this response variable, there is that kind of variability, and I have this kind of sample size, and then I can just, put some kind of distribution around it and create, instead of the power, I compute the probability of success.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But I think you want to go into much more depth and, want to look into many more features than just that one. What features are you thinking about?
Well, again, great question. And I should have said in the last answer, but I will lead into the answer in this question too. I often got frustrated as a statistician where, you'd be working in a project team, the protocol would be developed, the study population was kind of decided, even the endpoint was decided on, and then the team would get to the section in the protocol which talks about statistics and sample size. And they would throw it over the fence to the statistician to say, can you complete that bit?
And by the way, we have this budget.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, can you make the number 100? That sort of thing. And I felt that frustrated me, because I felt as statisticians we had an opportunity and the skills to input into lots of other parts of the protocol, and they are all interrelated, right? Yeah. So you can come up with a sample size of 100 or 1,000, but if that's not aligned with the inclusion and exclusion criteria or the ability to recruit patients, then it's silly to keep them as completely separate. So I felt we needed a tool that could facilitate much earlier engagement between statisticians and the rest of the project team, which is why we built Keras Cloud. And I'll just explain how it works. So the first step is to build a virtual patient population that comprises the characteristics that you believe to be important in the disease. So that includes all of the outcomes of interest. It includes all of the patient level risk factors of interest. And where the tool is kind of unique is it allows you to model the correlation between all of those features. It also allows you to introduce new data features such as missingness and specific patterns of missingness as well, or other imperfect data, and allows you to evaluate the impact of that. I'll stop and let you ask the question.
In terms of the correlation, so that's an interesting part. So if I have literature data, I can always think like, well, there's a baseline characteristics and here's the outcomes. And so I have all the marginal distributions, but you never get the published covariance metrics. So how do you get to that?
Good question. And this is where patient level data comes in. You are absolutely right that one of the first steps is to look through the literature to get those kind of population level statistics, and then we need to try and get the correlations. It is pretty common, I would say, and we've rarely had a case where we haven't been able to access patient level data. If we're working with a larger pharma company, they will of course have patient level data, and this goes back to my earlier comment about fully utilizing data that you might have access to. But even for smaller biotech companies, they might not have previous clinical trial data, but they will have investigators that they work with who might have patient registries that are relevant for the disease that they are looking in. They are able to broker access to that patient level data for us. The other element that we are looking at is to setting up relationships with data providers so that we can be much more kind of strategic and proactive in terms of building those patient level data sets that can drive the simulations.
Yeah, and then I think that is where it also comes in quite nicely is all the initiatives to make data more publicly available. So all these transparency initiatives like
clinical data sharing. There are similar things in the US. There's Yoda in the US. There's Project DataSphere as well. So there are these platforms whereby you can apply for access to patient level data. And I'll give you a recent example. We're working in pulmonary arterial hypertension. We have successfully applied to Yoda, and we've got access to patient level data from 50 clinical trials. So that allows us to get a really good evaluation of the correlation structure of the data.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really, really nice. So patient level data is something that we kind of, prognostic and predictive factors there. You also mentioned trial enrollment. How does that factor in? Is that kind of then to if you have more adaptive designs and things like that, or where does that factor in?
Yeah, good question. One of the beauties, I think, of simulation is it kind of allows you to go into different directions. So, you can evaluate the probability of a clinical trial design to achieve the, primary objective of the study. But given the information that comes out of the simulation, such as the sample size, you can start to model other things, such as, well, if we need 100 patients or whatever the number is, and we're able to recruit, 2 patients per week per site, how many sites will we need in order to complete recruitment within a certain period of time? So you can start to build on different features of the simulation. And, as I said, the nice thing about simulation is it allows you to go into different directions. And for me, crucially, the statistician is at the heart of that, really helping to drive that conversation. But even that, if you do choose to go into, the recruitment side of things, like all simulations, you need to have some good data on which to do your to run your modeling. You can get some of that from literature, but I am aware that some of the operations groups within big pharma are starting to collect that type of data. And again, I think stats really need to get involved in that to try and influence the way that data are collected, because they will have a big impact in the future if they're able to really grab hold of that opportunity.
I actually had an interview with Steve Pike as an earlier podcast episode where we specifically talked about these operational aspects of clinical studies and clinical trial programs, where statisticians can have a much bigger impact. And this is exactly what you're referring to. And completely see that, how can you best balance this kind of number of studies, number of sites versus recruitment time versus kind of quality, all these kind of versus budget, all these kind of different, aspects in the best way. Yeah, completely see that. You also mentioned other data quality aspects that you can basically model into the simulation as well, like missing, so dropouts and things like that. Anything else in that regard that you thought about?
Well, I think the thing with dropout and missingness, and this is very relevant in the current COVID situation, where there are ongoing studies that where they are getting patients, they have lots of patients who have missing visits. But the study was designed in such a way where they didn't really think about that level of missingness, or they made a very simplistic set of assumptions about how they would handle missingness, such as, we assume maybe 10% or 20% of the patients might be dropouts, so we'll just inflate the sample size by that amount, which again makes a very simplistic assumption that missingness is missing at random, when often that's not the case. So we wanted to build something where you could introduce missingness and different patterns of missingness, where the missingness was related to other features. So, and it's similar to what is underlying our software, which is this ability to look at correlation between variables. In the same way, missingness can be correlated with other things. You can correlate it with, safety signals. You can correlate it with efficacy or lack of. You can correlate it with treatment. So in other words, you have more missingness in one treatment group versus another. So you can start to introduce some realistic patterns of missingness, and then evaluate what impact that pattern has on the likelihood of success for the study, which has proved a really nice feature over the last few months.
Yeah, I can guess that. Yeah, just based on my own experience, just all the discussions about the COVID-19 impacts on studies, that was on, or still is on everybody's mind. Yeah, absolutely. So if you can do that with the studies that you are planning, could you also use this tool to look into a study that has already results and then see kind of, under which situations it would basically break? So to say, what kind of bias would you need to have introduced in your study to come up with a, false positive finding or something like this?
Absolutely. Yes. You can essentially use it at any time. We've done a really nice piece of work recently where we've looked at both adherence and persistence to treatment, looked over different patterns of adherence and persistence, and asked the question, well, when do the conclusions change? What is the extent of that lack of persistence and adherence, and what difference does that make? So absolutely, you can use it at different times, but ultimately, I think what you're trying to do is to build all of that information into the design stage of a study so that you prevent the avoidable failures.
Yeah, so you can already, from a kind of estimate framework, see kind of how will your different sensitivity analysis for a specific estimate, how will they look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's really nice. When I was doing my last simulation, and of course that's a little bit some time ago, I always had problems with kind of, if I want to do, to have a grid that is of all these different simulation patterns that is, let's say, quite dense and quite detailed. And then I would have for all these different simulation steps, a reasonable number of iterations. Well, I needed to wait sometimes quite long. And I can remember in my times when I did my PhD or my master thesis, I would kind of occupy the complete rooms that we had at the university with all the different PCs and kind of, lock them all, and they would, all run for overnight to give me each one a certain set of the simulations that I want to build together then. How's that looking now?
I had a very similar experience doing my PhD. I had 3 or 4 different towers in the department, and I'd set them all off on a Friday and hoped to come in on the following Monday, and they would all finish. And sometimes they fell over in the week, over the weekend, so you had to start the whole thing again.
Yeah.
I think that problem still exists, Alex, especially if people are trying to run simulations on a local machine or on a single server. we've got round that, and I think increasingly others are getting round it by using cloud computing. So our software is based on AWS. Before you kind of hit the go button, or as you hit the go button to run your simulations, it does a quick calculation to work out how long it would take to run on one machine, two machines, or whatever. Then it can fire up to 96 parallel machines, so that really, regardless of the complexity of the simulations and how many runs you're doing, you're going to get the answer back in minutes rather than days or weeks even. So I think in modern computing there are ways around the kind of processing power that is needed for complex simulations, and that's how we get around it.
Okay, very, very nice. Yeah, I've read so much about AWS and seen so many posts about it, but I think that's the first time that this is mentioned here on the podcast. So
yeah. we do like to be innovative, so yeah.
So in terms of having all these simulations, that is really great. Now, how do you communicate that in the best way? Because if you then have, all these what ifs and all these kind of, big tables of what comes out of that, especially if you have, more complex things, how do you get that communicated in the best way?
It's a good question. I think, what you can't do is hand people, hundreds of tables and say, okay, the answer's in there somehow. You've really got to take advantage of visualization tools to get your message across. A nice one that we use is a heat map, where if you imagine along one dimension of the heat map is all of your design options, and then across another dimension is, well, here are all of your analysis options and your decision rules. And then where they intersect is the probability of success for that particular combination. We have that. That's our kind of a first thing that we present. But the tool that we have is very interactive. So you can start to, once you want to drill into one of those scenarios, you can kind of click on the map and it kind of presents more information about it. So I would say visualization tools is key for simulation. One of the nice things about simulations is there are some underlying simulated data, which allows you to provide a bit more context, which make it real for the project team. They want to see graphs that they're kind of used to seeing, and having that underlying data allows you to provide that additional context. So again, we will use multi-panel plots to allow people to look at certain scenarios in a bit more detail, which is a really powerful tool, I would say. And you're presenting kind of results in a way that they would be used to seeing. I think one of the benefits of a simulation is it helps the team to engage. I think any statistician will know this kind of situation where, you have completed a stats section of a protocol and it gets sent out for review. Once it comes back, there are comments in all sections until you get to the stats section and nobody said anything. And you sometimes think, I could literally have written anything there. Nobody is in a position to really evaluate what I've done. So whereas when you are involved in a simulation activity, one good thing is that the project team, they recognize the need for this, so they are invested in it. You take them along on that journey with you, and actually it's a really powerful tool to help the team get to an optimized study design where they all feel that they've had an input. So simulation is kind of that framework around which everyone has their input, everyone agrees on the assumptions that you make, and then everyone can agree on what the final decision was because you've provided that framework. In my view, it's a really powerful tool for doing that. But an important part of it is having those visualization tools, which will allow them to look at all of their results, which are multidimensional, in a way that they can understand.
Yes, that's really good, and I think there is the speed of the response really, really good. Yeah, if you have a discussion and you think, okay, this is the current scenario, and someone comes up with, what if we would change this one, or someone else joins the team and I'm not sure about this assumption. I think it should be 10% higher or whatever. And then you say, I need to go back. I can tell you the answer tomorrow. But with a tool that is much more interactive, and maybe you don't get the super precision, but you get kind of a ballpark very, very quickly back. That really helps you to have these interactive discussions about things and see, okay, where you're going, and you can really kind of engage. And also, people understand and value your work much more. I think that's a really, really nice benefit. And you're not kind of the nerd somewhere that does his magic and then comes up with some things that we don't understand and we just copy and paste into the protocol.
Absolutely. You are embedded in the team. You are the go-to person when it comes to any kind of quantitative decisions that need to be made. Absolutely. I think it's a really powerful way of having a much greater impact and having a really pivotal role within a team.
Yeah, and I think also the discussions which we mentioned earlier about the operations. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that will be really, really interesting in that regard as well.
Yeah.
So that is how it looks now. And, we just talked about, how our time at, when we did our masters and PhDs has looked like. So there's so much going on in that space. What do you think will happen in the next 5 years?
Yeah. Again, a great question. As you know, this simulation is not new. People have been doing it for a long time. But I do think it is disjointed. There are lots of individual tools that might do a specific application of simulation, whether they be adaptive designs or whatever. I feel we're in a situation now where if you have that sort of tool, then of course, adaptive design is the answer to everything, or some alternative tool. Then you kind of try and promote that. I think we need to sort of try and consolidate that a bit so that we can evaluate the performance of different design options all at the same time and compare them with, the more standard approaches, so that we're making a much more informed decision about, well, actually what's best in our case, So I think there's going to be a bit of consolidation there, and I think the industry needs it. I think there's certainly a bit around how do you feed those simulations. And we talked a bit about data. When you look within big pharma, there are moves now to look back at those historical data and, how do we best use those? There are external data providers that are beginning to open up now. So I think you're going to see much more use of historical data to feed the simulations. And what I'd love to see as well is a true completion of that feedback loop. So, we design studies, we make assumptions at the start of the study. Those studies are conducted. We get the actual clinical data out of it. And, we need to start comparing. These are the assumptions that we had. This is what actually happened. How do we learn from that? So there's a proper kind of ecosystem, which is data-driven. It has all of these tools running in the middle, but there's a feedback loop as well. And we start to learn from from that feedback to make sure that we are, making much better clinical trial design decisions in advance of the study. And I think with that, statistics has the opportunity to completely transform the industry.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think there is, you just mentioned in terms of the application, thinking about just the design features and the results, but then about the operations. And then I think there's lots of other areas that you can think about, is about lots of other business parts that we can go into, like finance and other areas where, we need to kind of evaluate what are our decisions and how would that look like and what will be the consequences. And maybe at a given point, everybody has this kind of own simulation on the iPhone or on the smartphone or whatsoever, where you can just say, oh, if I now kind of dose up here or dose down or whatsoever, how will that look like for me? Yeah. So
give you a nice current example of some of the things you're mentioning there. Over the last 20 years, clinical trials have become more complex, and not necessarily because of the different types of designs that we have, but just because of the data that we're collecting. So, the number of endpoints that we collect in clinical trials is much higher than it used to. But, those endpoints have not necessarily, particularly if they're secondary or exploratory endpoints, not part of a design process. And what we've started doing is building all of those into the design and then working out, well, what's the likelihood that we will ever be able to say anything about those endpoints? And, often the chance of success is, a few percent. It's really very small. So there's a decision around, what value is there by including them? Because that just increases the cost of the study, and you're building in some of the financial aspects of that. So that's a piece of work that we're doing at the moment.
Awesome. Thanks so much. You'll find a lot of further descriptions of these features in the show notes and links to Exploristics and Aiden's team. And so thanks so much, Aiden. That was an awesome discussion about simulation. We started kind of from the very, very early in terms of why simulation helps. It helps you in all the aspects where, just just from a purely analysis point of view, you can't move forward, or just with mathematical solutions, and that you can look into many more different features of your design, of your operational aspects of the study. And with the use of AWS and other cloud computing services, there's really no kind of big limitations anymore on the computational aspect, which is really, really good. And I love that you talked about the communication of communication of these simulations, and that visualizations really play a key role in there. I think that is another area where statisticians can really work a lot more, because the community is just expecting that. Non-statisticians are so much more pulled towards visualizations rather than tables and numbers, which statisticians are traditionally more looking into, because they want to directly see the impact, and that's so nice with visualizations. So thanks a lot for this really nice interview. Any last point you would like to make the listener remember?
Well, I know the audience for this is predominantly a statistics audience. I think as a group of people, we've been maybe taken over slightly by the data science community. And I'll give you a nice example of that. We advertised a job earlier this year for statistician, and we got 2 applications. Then we reposted the same job and put data science instead of statistician, and we got more than 70 applications. So we didn't change anything else. So we've sort of slightly been overtaken here, and I think we need to try and grab that back a bit. We need to raise awareness about what the difference between statistics and other areas of data science are, and in a way, it's been nice that with COVID, statistics as a word has been used a bit more, and that's nice too. But and I think part of the thing that we need to do, and it's as you've mentioned, we need to embrace some of these new data visualization. Customers love that sort of stuff, and embrace some of these new tools and approaches, and try and drive some of that change.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aiden.
Thanks, Alex.
This show was created in association with PSI. Thanks to Rain, who helps with the show in the background, and thank you for listening. Head over to theeffectivestatistician.com to find the show notes with all the links, and also lots of other episodes, lots of other content that will help you to boost your career as a statistician in the health sector. Please tell your colleagues about this podcast. They will likely benefit from it as well. Reach your potential, lead great science, and serve patients. Just be an effective statistician.